A single bullet changes everything, not through its impact, but through its warning, the hollow echo that follows, telling you that nothing will ever be the same again. That's how empires fall, not with armies or declarations, but with one person who refuses to look away. They say the most dangerous creation in the world isn't the weapon, but the whisper of truth against power. When you've lived 70 years like I have, you learn that silence kills more surely than any bullet. I learned it watching brave souls burn in a spaceship I helped build, their voices forever silenced by the words I failed to speak loudly enough. Now, in the frozen Montana wilderness, with a child clutching secrets that could topple kingdoms of the mind, I face the same choice again. The storm outside is nothing compared to what's coming: men in black vehicles with orders to erase us from existence, to protect a system that has already stolen something more precious than life itself, the freedom to choose our own fate. Some roads lead to salvation, others straight to hell. Tonight, those roads have become one. The first bullet of winter struck Oregon's Cascade foothills on a Tuesday night. Not lead, but crystallized water, sharp and unforgiving. Jack Miller watched from his workshop window as the storm layered inch after inch of white silence across the valley. At 70, his bones felt the cold more acutely now, like old metal fatigued by too many temperature cycles. His weathered hands, marked with the calluses and scars of decades of mechanical work, cradled a chipped mug of coffee gone lukewarm. Another night for ghosts, he muttered to himself, a habit formed during 17 years of rural solitude. Jack's property, 10 acres of pine-studded land with a modest cabin and a sprawling workshop he'd built himself, sat isolated at the end of a county road, rarely maintained even in good weather. The nearest neighbor lived 3 miles downhill, an arrangement that suited him perfectly. The red, weather-worn sign that read Miller's Repairs had become more suggestion than advertisement. These days, he fixed only what interested him, when it interested him. The workshop smelled of motor oil, sawdust, and the metallic tang of worked steel scents that had defined his life's second act. Various half-finished projects littered the space. An ancient John Deere tractor engine splayed open like surgical patient. A 1967 Mustang up on blocks, its transmission removed. Custom farming implements commissioned by organic farmers who'd moved into the valley over the past decade. Tonight, Jack had meant to finish rebuilding a water pump for old man Gunderson's combine, but the weather had other plans. The electricity flickered as wind howled against the reinforced walls, rattling the high windows with mounting insistence. "Power's not going to last," he predicted, reaching for the kerosene lantern hanging by the door. A NASA engineer's habits die hard, always planning for contingencies. Few in the valley knew of Jack Miller's previous life, how those same hands had once calibrated gyroscopic systems for the Apollo missions, how his calculations had helped guide men to the moon, how his name appeared in small print on patents for aerospace navigation systems still in use today. Even fewer knew about his testimony before a closed congressional committee in 1986, when he tried to warn them about critical safety failures that would later claim the lives of 7 astronauts aboard the Challenger. The memories surfaced unbidden. The dismissive looks from program directors when he'd presented his findings. The political pressure to maintain launch schedules. The whispered suggestion that he should be a team player. And then, the television broadcast he'd watched alone in his apartment, knowing exactly what would happen 11 seconds after liftoff. Jack set down the coffee mug with enough force to chip it further. 35 years. And the weight hadn't diminished. If anything, time had only calcified his regret into something harder, more permanent, like the arthritis that had settled into his knuckles. The lights gave a final, defeated flicker and died completely, leaving only the orange glow of the wood stove and the shadows it cast. Jack lit the lantern with practiced ease. The sudden darkness didn't bother him. He'd long ago wired a backup generator to power essential systems, but he'd wait for morning to fire it up. No sense wasting fuel when he could just as easily head to bed early. He was securing the workshop doors when he heard a soft scraping sound from the rear storage area where he kept his collection of carts, wheelbarrows, and other rolling equipment accumulated over decades. Jack's body tensed, muscle memory from Vietnam activating despite the decades between. "Who's there?" His voice carried the unmistakable command of someone who'd once held rank, despite having left the military 50 years prior. Silence answered, broken only by the insistent drumming of snow against metal roofing. Then another sound, small, but unmistakable, a cough, quickly muffled. Jack reached behind the workbench for the 12-gauge shotgun he kept loaded with rock salt enough to dissuade trespassers without causing permanent damage. He moved quietly across the concrete floor, his steps silent from years of hunting in these same mountains. "Last chance," he called out, the lantern held aloft in his left hand, shotgun steady in his right. "Show yourself before this gets unpleasant." A rustling came from beneath a canvas tarp draped over his oldest cart, a hand-built affair with pneumatic tires he'd designed for hauling engine blocks. Jack approached cautiously, using the barrel of the shotgun to lift one corner of the tarp. Two eyes, wide with fear, reflected the lantern light back at him. Not the eyes of a desperate addict or drifter, but a child's eyes, a boy no more than 10, huddled beneath a worn backpack used as a makeshift pillow. "Jesus Christ!" Jack lowered the shotgun immediately. "What the hell are you doing out here?" "Son." The boy sat up, pressing himself against the cart's metal side, as though hoping to disappear into it. He wore a navy blue winter coat far too large for his small frame, jeans with reinforced knees, and hiking boots caked with frozen mud. Dark hair fell across his forehead, partially obscuring those frightened eyes. "I—" The boy started, then stopped, gaze locked on the shotgun Jack still held. Jack set the weapon aside, deliberately placing it on a workbench out of reach. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice gentler now. "But you picked a hell of a night to go wandering. Storm's getting worse by the minute." The boy glanced toward the workshop's high windows, where snow now pelted sideways against the glass. His shoulders sagged slightly. "Let's start simple," Jack said, crouching down despite the protest from his knees. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, then mumbled. "Lucas." "Last name?" Another hesitation. "Gardner." Jack nodded. "I'm Jack. Jack Miller. This is my place you've snuck into." He gestured around the workshop. "Parents around somewhere. Lucas. They know where you are." The boy's face tightened, and Jack immediately recognized the expression, grief attempting to masquerade as stoicism. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough. "My mom's gone," Lucas said flatly. Jack absorbed this, nodding slowly. "And your dad never had one." The boy's chin lifted slightly, a defensive posture. Jack sighed, feeling the situation growing more complicated by the second. A runaway, most likely. Child services would need to be called, but with the roads already impassable and power out, that wasn't happening tonight. "When's the last time you ate?" "Lucas." The boy's eyes darted sideways, calculating. "Yesterday morning." "Well then," Jack straightened, knees cracking audibly. "First things first. Let's get you up to the house and find something to put in your stomach. Then we can figure out what to do with you." Lucas didn't move. "Are you going to call the police?" Jack met the boy's gaze directly. "Eventually, someone official needs to know where you are. But right now, the phones are down along with the power, and nobody's driving through that." He nodded toward the howling storm outside. "So you've got at least until morning before we need to worry about that." "Fair enough." After a moment's consideration, Lucas nodded and carefully climbed down from the cart, clutching his backpack to his chest like a shield. Something about the bag caught Jack's attention. Not its well-worn fabric or the NASA patch sewn onto one pocket, though that did raise an eyebrow. But the way the boy held it, not casually slung over his shoulder, but protected. Vital. "Follow me," Jack said, grabbing a heavy canvas coat from a hook by the door. "Put this over yours. It's only 50 yards to the house, but in this weather, that's enough to get disoriented." The boy disappeared almost entirely inside the oversized coat, looking more like a walking bundle of fabric than a child. Jack took a firm grip on his shoulder, and together they pushed through the workshop's side door into the blinding snow. The wind struck them immediately, driving ice crystals against any exposed skin with stinging precision. Jack leaned into it, guiding Lucas across the yard toward the golden glow of cabin windows. The backup generator had automatically kicked in, providing minimal power to essential circuits. Once inside, Jack helped Lucas remove the snow-crusted coats and guided him to the stone fireplace, where embers still glowed from earlier that evening. The cabin was simple but comfortable, a large open living area with a kitchen along one wall, a bedroom and bathroom off to one side, and a narrow staircase leading to a loft area Jack used as an office and library. Bookshelves lined every available wall, filled with technical manuals, engineering texts, history books, and worn paperback mysteries. "Sit," Jack instructed, pointing to a leather armchair positioned by the fire. "I'll stoke this up and get something warm in you." Lucas obeyed silently, still clutching the backpack in his lap. As Jack built up the fire, he studied the boy from the corner of his eye, thin but not malnourished. Clothes of good quality though well worn, no visible bruises or signs of abuse. Most notable was his watchfulness, the way his eyes cataloged every detail of the room, marking exits, tracking Jack's movements with wary precision. "How'd you find my place?" Jack asked casually, adding another log to the growing flames. Lucas shrugged. "I was just walking. Saw lights. It was getting really cold." "You walked here," Jack frowned. "Nearest town is Riverstone, 15 miles downhill. You came from there?" "No." The boy's expression closed further. "I was dropped off near here." Jack's frown deepened. "Dropped off by who?" "A friend of my mom's. I was supposed to find you." The statement landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of alarm through Jack. He straightened, fixing Lucas with a direct gaze. "You want to run that by me again? Son, you were looking for me specifically." Lucas nodded slowly, something changing in his posture, a fractional relaxation, as though having delivered a message he'd been carrying too long. "Mom said if anything happened to her, I should find Jack Miller in Cascade Valley. She said you worked for NASA a long time ago. Like her. Said you'd help me." Jack's mind raced, scanning through decades of colleagues, trying to place a female gardener among them. "Your mother worked for NASA. What's her name? Dr. Melissa Gardner. She wasn't at NASA, though. She worked for Centauri Technologies." The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Centauri Technologies, a defense contractor that had grown into one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world, with tentacles reaching into everything from satellite systems to consumer data mining. He'd followed their rise with professional interest and personal distaste, recognizing many of his own innovations repurposed in their patents. "And why did your mother think I'd help you, Lucas?" Jack asked quietly, already suspecting the answer wouldn't simplify matters. The boy finally unzipped his backpack, reaching inside with careful precision. What he withdrew wasn't what Jack expected, not documents or photographs, but what appeared to be an oversized digital watch with a matte black face. "Because of this," Lucas said, holding it out, "and because they killed her for making it." Jack took the device, turning it over in his weathered hands. It was heavier than it looked, with no visible buttons or interface, just a smooth surface that remained dark. Despite its watch-like appearance, it had no strap, just connection points where one might have been. "What am I looking at?" "Lucas. Mom called it Phoenix's egg. It's got everything on it, all the proof about what they're doing. She said you'd know how to use it because you built the original system it's based on." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter storm crept up Jack's spine. "Your mother is dead," Lucas nodded, his composure finally cracking. His lower lip trembled once before he bit down on it. "Car accident, they said, 2 weeks ago, but she told me. She told me if they ever came for her, I needed to grab this and run." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It wasn't an accident." Before Jack could respond, a new sound cut through the howling wind outside a high-pitched whine, mechanical and deliberate, circling the property. Jack recognized it immediately. He'd helped design the first prototypes during his consulting years. "Down!" he commanded sharply, pulling Lucas to the floor and extinguishing the lantern with one quick motion. "Away from the windows!" Lucas flattened himself against the hardwood without question, eyes wide. "What is it?" "Drone," Jack said grimly, crawling toward the nearest window and peering through a narrow gap in the curtains. "Military grade from the sound of it. Not some hobbyist toy." Outside, barely visible through the driving snow, a dark shape hovered roughly the size of a small suitcase, with multiple rotors and what appeared to be a sensor package mounted underneath. Red and blue lights blinked along its chassis as it executed a methodical search pattern over the property. "They found me," Lucas whispered, terror evident in his voice. Jack watched the drone complete another circuit, noting how its sensors lingered over the workshop before moving toward the cabin. His mind worked rapidly, evaluating options, resources, escape routes. The boy wasn't delusional or confused. Someone had indeed tracked him here, and with specialized equipment. "Listen carefully," Jack said, keeping his voice steady. "Behind the bookshelf in the kitchen, there's a door. It leads to a root cellar. I want you to take your backpack and that device and wait for me there. Don't make a sound. Don't turn on any lights." Lucas hesitated. "What about you?" Jack's weathered face hardened into lines of determination. "I'm going to create a diversion. Now move!" As Lucas scurried toward the kitchen, Jack pulled open a drawer beneath the gun cabinet, removing a small metal case. Inside lay a device he'd built years ago after reading about surveillance countermeasures, a focused EMP emitter with enough power to disable electronics within a 20-foot radius. It wouldn't work against hardened military equipment, but most commercial drones, even expensive ones, lacked such protection. The drone's whine grew louder as it approached the cabin's north side. Jack crept to the back door, the countermeasure device clutched in his right hand. He would have one chance to get close enough without being spotted. Easing the door open, he slipped into the frigid night, immediately pressing his back against the cabin wall. The snow had lessened slightly, allowing better visibility. The drone hovered 30 feet away, its sensors scanning the workshop systematically, a focused beam of light cutting through the darkness. Jack worked his way around the cabin's perimeter, using decades-old training to move silently through the snow. When he'd positioned himself downwind of the drone, he activated the EMP device, waited for the capacitors to charge, and stepped into the open. The drone's sensors swiveled toward him instantly, but too late. Jack depressed the trigger, sending an electromagnetic pulse outward in a focused cone. The effect was immediate and satisfying. The drone's lights flickered, its rotors stuttered, and then the entire unit dropped from the sky like a stone, impacting the snow with a muffled thud. Jack approached cautiously, studying the downed aircraft. It was indeed military grade or close to it, with thermal imaging capability and what appeared to be a satellite uplink. No weapons, but the surveillance package was state-of-the-art. Someone had invested significant resources in finding Lucas. More concerning was what the drone represented. This was merely advanced reconnaissance. Whoever sent it now knew exactly where Lucas had sought refuge, and they would be coming in person soon. Jack hurried back inside, locking the door behind him and quickly moving through the cabin to secure all potential entry points. When he reached the kitchen, he pulled on a specific book, a well-worn copy of Fahrenheit 451, causing the entire bookshelf to swing outward on hidden hinges. "Lucas!" he called softly into the darkness beyond. "Here!" came the small voice from below. Jack descended narrow stairs into a space much larger than a typical root cellar. The room, approximately 15 by 20 feet, was lined with metal shelving holding canned goods, water jugs, medical supplies, and ammunition boxes. A small generator hummed in one corner, powering a ventilation system and 2 LED lights currently switched off. "You can turn the lights on now," Jack said, locating the switch himself. Lucas blinked in the sudden illumination, taking in the underground room with wide eyes. You were expecting something like this to happen. A grim smile touched Jack's lips. Not this specifically, no, but I learned a long time ago to prepare for worst-case scenarios. He didn't mention that the bunker had been built during the Cold War years when his clearance level had made him uncomfortably aware of just how close the world had come to nuclear exchange. Multiple times. Did you stop the drone? Lucas asked. Temporarily. Jack moved to a radio setup on a metal desk in the corner. But whoever sent it knows you're here now. We need to move before they arrive. But the storm is our best protection at the moment. Jack began gathering supplies into a weatherproof bag: food, first aid kit, extra ammunition, emergency blankets. The main roads will be impassable, which works in our favor. I have snowmobiles in a shed behind the workshop. We can use the Forest Service roads to head west. Where are we going? Jack paused, considering. To see an old friend who might be able to help us make sense of what your mother gave you? He gestured to the device Lucas still clutched. But first, I need you to tell me everything. Who exactly is after you? And what does that thing contain that's worth killing for? Lucas took a deep breath, his small shoulders squaring with a determination that seemed beyond his years. Mom was a data scientist for Centauri. She designed algorithms for their predictive behavior systems. She said they were supposed to be for marketing, but then she found out they were using them for something called Project Phoenix. What kind of project? She wouldn't tell me everything. Said it was safer if I didn't know, but she was scared, really scared. She said they'd built something that could control what people think without them knowing it. Lucas held up the device. This has all the evidence. She called it an insurance policy. Jack's expression darkened. He'd seen firsthand how technology developed for benign purposes could be weaponized. His own navigation systems, designed to guide spacecraft, had later been adapted for missile targeting without his knowledge or consent. And these people who are looking for you, they're from Centauri. Lucas nodded. A man named Marcus Reed. He's head of security. Mom said he used to be a Navy SEAL. She said he'd stop at nothing to get this back. How did your mother know me? Jack asked, the question that had been bothering him most. She had a picture of you in her office. You were standing with a bunch of people in front of a rocket. She said you were the most honest man she ever knew, and that you'd paid the price for it. Jack closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the past pressing down again. Honest to a fault, his supervisors had called him a naive idealist who didn't understand the realities of bureaucracy and budgets. They'd been partially right. He hadn't understood how easily safety could be compromised when careers and contracts were at stake. A sudden noise from above snapped Jack back to the present, the distinctive crunch of tires on snow-covered gravel. Multiple vehicles by the sound of it. They're here, he whispered, switching off the lights. Stay put and stay silent. Jack climbed the stairs, closing the hidden door carefully behind him. He moved swiftly through the darkened cabin to the front window, keeping well to the side as he peered out. 3 black SUVs had pulled into his yard, their headlights cutting through the diminishing snowfall. Men in tactical gear were already deploying, moving with the coordinated precision of military training. 8, no, 10 of them, forming a perimeter around the cabin and workshop. At their center stood a tall figure, giving silent hand signals, his bearing unmistakably that of someone accustomed to command. Marcus Reed, Jack presumed, studying the man through narrowed eyes. Reed appeared to be in his mid-50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the lean, powerful build of someone who hadn't allowed age to soften him. He wore a black parka with no insignia, tactical pants, and winter boots. Unlike his men, he carried no visible weapon, projecting the confidence of someone who delegated the actual violence. Jack moved away from the window, mind racing. The odds were impossible: 10 trained operatives against one 70-year-old man and a child. He couldn't fight them head-on, but he hadn't survived Vietnam, NASA's internal politics, and 17 years of harsh mountain winters by giving up when outmatched. He glanced around the cabin, seeing it not as his home but as a tactical environment. The architecture, The furnishings, the very systems he'd installed over the years, all could be weaponized if approached correctly. Engineers, he'd always believed, made the most dangerous opponents. They understood how things worked, how they could be made to fail. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted his planning. "Mr. Miller," called a measured voice reads, "Undoubtedly. We know you're in there, and we know who you're harboring. I'd like to discuss this situation civilly if possible." Jack didn't respond, instead moving silently toward the kitchen where he'd left his shotgun leaning against the counter. He checked the load salt rounds. Not lethal, but he had buckshot in his pocket if needed. "Mr. Miller," Reed called again. "The boy has taken something that doesn't belong to him, something very valuable to my employer. Return it, and I can promise your involvement will be overlooked." Jack positioned himself where he could see both the front door and the large picture window overlooking the valley. Two of Reed's men had moved to positions flanking the porch, while others established a perimeter around the cabin. "I'm going to count to 30, Mr. Miller," Reed continued, his tone almost conversational. "After that, I'm afraid civility will no longer be an option." Jack had no intention of waiting for the countdown to complete. He moved to the breaker panel concealed behind a landscape painting, flipping switches in a specific sequence. Throughout the cabin, systems he'd installed for various contingencies hummed to life. Outside, Reed had reached 15 when the exterior floodlights suddenly blazed, bathing the entire property in harsh white light. His men flinched, momentarily blinded after adjusting to the darkness. Simultaneously, the workshop's fire suppression system activated, sending powerful jets of water mixed with fire-retardant chemicals spraying in all directions, catching 3 operatives in its radius. The distraction was enough. Jack slipped through the kitchen to the mudroom, exiting through a side door that faced away from the assembled force. He hugged the shadow line of the cabin, working his way toward the small equipment shed where he kept the snowmobiles. Behind him, he heard glass breaking. They were entering the cabin. They'd find it empty, discover the hidden door eventually, but the bunker had another exit, one that led to a narrow tunnel emerging in the very shed Jack was now approaching. He had nearly reached it when a floodlight swung in his direction. Jack dropped and rolled beneath the elevated porch just as gunfire erupted, splintering wood where he'd stood a moment before. The shots weren't aimed to kill warning fire, designed to immobilize rather than eliminate. Reed wanted the device intact, which meant keeping Jack alive for questioning, pressed against frozen earth. Jack evaluated his options. The shed was still 30 yards away, now illuminated and watched. The cabin was being breached. He needed a third alternative. His gaze fell on the workshop, specifically the ancient John Deere tractor positioned near the main doors. The engine was disassembled, but the fuel tank remained intact full. In fact, as he'd been preparing to pressure test it. A plan formed, desperate but potentially effective. Jack waited until the floodlight passed again, then darted from beneath the porch toward the workshop's side entrance. More shouts, more gunfire, but he reached the door before they could adjust their aim, slipping inside and barricading it behind him. The workshop offered more cover tools, equipment, partially disassembled vehicles. Jack moved between them, making his way toward the tractor. From his workbench, he grabbed a rag, stuffing it into the fuel tank's filler neck, leaving a length hanging out. Then, from a drawer, he retrieved road flares. When the workshop door burst open, Jack was waiting. Reed entered first, flanked by 2 operatives with raised weapons. "It's over, Mr. Miller," Reed said calmly. "The boy isn't worth dying for." Jack straightened from behind the tractor, hands raised in apparent surrender. "You're probably right," he admitted, "but principles are, and I've always believed that when knowledge becomes dangerous to power, it's the powerful who need to be afraid, not the knowledgeable." Reed's expression hardened. "Philosophy won't save you from a federal detention facility. Where is the boy safe?" Jack said, then dropped one hand to his pocket, extracting what appeared to be a remote control. "Which is more than I can say for you if you don't leave my property immediately." Reed's eyes narrowed. What is that insurance policy? Jack replied, using Lucas's mother's phrase deliberately. I've rigged the propane tanks behind the workshop, one press, and this place becomes a crater. It was a bluff. The device in his hand was actually a garage door opener, but Reed couldn't know that. The security chief's gaze flicked to the partially visible propane tanks, just visible through the workshop's rear window. You'd die too, Reed pointed out. Jack shrugged. I'm 70 years old with more regrets than future. But you've got, what, maybe 15 years before retirement? A wife, kids worth risking all that for whatever corporate secret you're protecting? Doubt flickered across Reed's face. Not fear for himself, Jack noted, but calculation. The mission parameters obviously called for recovery with minimal attention. An explosion, deaths. Local authorities all would complicate matters significantly. Walk away, Jack pressed. Tell your employers you haven't found what you're looking for yet. Buy me 24 hours? And then what? Reed asked, his posture relaxing fractionally. And then maybe we talk. On neutral ground, with guarantees. The standoff stretched for 10 agonizing seconds, neither man blinking. Finally, Reed gave a nearly imperceptible nod. 24 hours, he conceded. But understand this. Mr. Miller, the people I work for, don't compromise. They don't negotiate. They simply prevail. Always. Whatever the cost. I've met their type before, Jack said evenly. Didn't much care for them then either. Reed's mouth twitched in what might have been reluctant respect. He gestured to his men, who lowered their weapons slightly. We'll withdraw, he said, but we'll be watching. If you attempt to leave, if you try to contact authorities, the deal is void. Jack nodded once, maintaining his grip on the fake detonator. Reed backed out slowly, his men following suit. Through the workshop window, Jack watched them retreat to their vehicles, the engines starting with synchronized precision. He waited until the SUVs had disappeared down his long driveway before collapsing against the tractor, his heart hammering painfully in his chest. The confrontation had taken more out of him than he cared to admit, adrenaline now exacting its price from an aging body. But he'd bought time, not much, but enough to execute the beginnings of a plan. Reed had been partially convinced by the bluff, but Jack harbored no illusions. Surveillance would be established, probably within the hour. Any attempt to leave by the main road would be detected immediately. Jack moved quickly back to the cabin, retrieving Lucas from the bunker. The boy's face was pale but composed, his eyes asking the question before his voice could. They're gone, for now, Jack assured him. But they'll be back, and with more men next time. We need to move. Where? Lucas asked, clutching his backpack. The snowmobiles are our best option, Jack said, already gathering cold weather gear from a closet. There's a Forest Service road that runs along the western ridge. It connects to logging trails that can take us down to the valley floor, away from the main roads where they'll be watching. And then what? Jack handed Lucas a heavy thermal suit, sized for a child equipment he'd kept for visits from his brother's grandchildren that had never materialized after the falling out 15 years ago. Then we find someone who can help us understand what your mother discovered, he said. Someone I trust, an old friend named Margaret Wilson. Is she from NASA too? Jack shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. Harvard Law, class of '78. We dated briefly before career paths pulled us in different directions. She served in the Justice Department for decades, prosecuting corporate fraud cases. His expression sobered. If anyone can help us navigate this legally, it's Peggy. Lucas nodded, accepting the answer with the same grave seriousness he'd displayed throughout their short acquaintance. Jack wondered again about the boy's background. What kind of childhood produces such composure in the face of danger? As Lucas dressed in the thermal gear, Jack packed essential supplies into a weatherproof backpack: food, water, first aid supplies, ammunition, and a satellite phone kept for emergencies. He changed into his own cold weather gear, strapping a hunting knife to his belt and loading a revolver with actual bullets. Not rock salt. Ready, he asked, surveying their preparations. Lucas nodded, the oversized thermal suit making him look like a miniature astronaut. Jack led him through the cabin to the mudroom exit, listening intently for any sound that might indicate Reed's men had remained behind. Hearing nothing but the diminishing wind, he eased the door open. The storm had largely passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white, broken only by the churned tracks of Reed's vehicles. The moon had emerged from behind dispersing clouds, casting everything in silvery illumination. Beautiful, but problematic, they would leave obvious tracks, and there was little cover between the cabin and the equipment shed. "Stay close," Jack whispered. "Move exactly where I move." They slipped out into the bitter cold, Jack leading them along the tree line where shadows offered some concealment. The shed loomed ahead, its padlocked door a dark rectangle against weathered wood. Jack produced a key, working quickly to open it while scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. Inside the shed, two snowmobiles waited beneath canvas covers, an older model Jack had restored himself, and a newer one purchased 3 years ago, when his knees began protesting the mile-long walk to his favorite fishing spot. He uncovered the newer machine, checking its fuel tank and controls. "Ever ridden one of these before?" he asked Lucas. The boy shook his head. "You'll sit in front of me, between my arms. Hold on to the hand grips I show you, and lean when I lean. Understand?" Lucas nodded, eyes wide with apprehension and perhaps a touch of excitement, the first childlike reaction Jack had witnessed from him. Jack pushed the snowmobile out of the shed, then helped Lucas mount before climbing on behind him. The key turned, and the engine rumbled to life, shattering the night silence. Jack winced at the noise unavoidable, but it would carry far in the still air. They needed to move quickly. "Hold tight," he instructed, gunning the throttle. The snowmobile lurched forward, cutting a clean path through unbroken powder as Jack guided it away from the cabin toward the tree line, marking the beginning of national forest land. The cold air bit at any exposed skin, bringing tears to his eyes that threatened to freeze on his lashes. Lucas hunched lower, protected somewhat by Jack's larger frame behind him. They had traveled perhaps half a mile, following a game trail that paralleled the property line. When Jack spotted it, a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, then the unmistakable whine of another snowmobile engine starting up. "They left someone behind," he muttered grimly, increasing their speed. The forest loomed ahead, dark pines offering potential cover. Jack aimed for a narrow gap between trunks, the snowmobile's headlight illuminating their path just enough to avoid obstacles. Behind them, the second engine grew louder. Their pursuer had spotted them and was closing the distance. Jack pushed the machine to its limits, weaving between trees with reckless precision, climbing toward the ridge where the Forest Service road would provide easier passage. Lucas clung to the hand grips, his small body tense but moving in perfect synchronization with Jack's, instinctively leaning into each turn. The pursuing engine continued to gain ground. Jack risked a glance back, catching the bobbing gleam of a headlight through the trees. One rider, moving fast and with obvious skill, likely one of Reed's more experienced operatives, left behind specifically to watch for escape attempts. They burst from the tree line onto the narrow shelf of the Forest Service road, a packed earth path just wide enough for a single vehicle, now covered in 6 inches of fresh snow. Jack opened the throttle fully, the snowmobile leaping forward like a startled deer. The road curved ahead, hugging the contour of the mountain, offering panoramic views of the valley below during daylight hours, but now just a yawning darkness to their right. Their pursuer emerged from the trees seconds later, gaining steadily on the straightaway. In the moonlight, Jack caught a glimpse of the rider, a lean figure in black tactical gear, an assault rifle strapped across his back. The man was riding aggressively, closing the distance with each passing second. "Hold on tight," Jack shouted over the engine's roar. "Things are about to get interesting." He waited until they approached a sharp bend in the road, then made his move instead of following the curve. He cut the wheel sharply, sending them plunging off the road into deep powder, down a steep slope between widely spaced trees. It was a dangerous gambit, The snowmobile wasn't designed for such extreme angles, and one wrong move would send them tumbling. Behind them, their pursuer slowed momentarily, then followed their tracks over the edge. Jack smiled grimly. The man was committed now, unable to radio for backup until he either caught them or gave up the chase, and Jack had no intention of allowing either outcome. The slope grew steeper, their descent accelerating beyond safety. Jack spotted what he was looking for, a natural depression ahead, filled with deep snow, with a fallen log creating a natural ramp on the far side. "Lean back," he shouted to Lucas, pulling the boy tight against his chest as he shifted his own weight to the rear of the machine. They hit the depression at full speed, the snowmobile's front end lifting as it plowed through deep powder, then launching off the fallen log in a graceful arc that momentarily suspended gravity. For 2 exhilarating seconds, they were airborne, the engine whining at empty air before they crashed back to Earth with bone-jarring force. Jack struggled to maintain control, the snowmobile fishtailing wildly before he wrestled it back into submission. When he looked back, he saw their pursuer hit the same depression, but without the warning or experience. The man couldn't compensate in time. His snowmobile nosedived into the snow, catapulting its rider over the handlebars in a spectacular tumble. There was no time to confirm whether the man was injured or merely delayed. Jack turned their machine back toward the west, where the terrain leveled into a series of rolling meadows. They crossed these quickly, the snowmobile's track leaving an unmistakable trail but buying crucial distance from their pursuer. After 20 minutes of hard riding, Jack finally throttled down, allowing the overworked engine a reprieve. They had reached the edge of a frozen lake, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting moonlight and stars. "Are we safe?" Lucas asked, his voice small against the vast silence. "For the moment," Jack replied, scanning the tree line behind them. "But we need to keep moving. There's an old hunting cabin on the far side of this lake. We can rest there briefly, then continue before dawn." "Where does your friend live?" "The lawyer lady. About 60 miles southwest of here. She has a small organic farm near Riverford." Jack rubbed his gloved hands together, working feeling back into cold, numb fingers. "If we push hard, we can reach her by mid-morning." Lucas nodded, then hesitated. "Thank you," he said finally, "for helping me. Mom said you would, but you've learned adults don't always keep their promises." Jack finished for him, understanding all too well. "Your mother must have been an extraordinary woman. Lucas, I wish I'd had the chance to meet her." "She was," the boy affirmed, a tremor in his voice betraying the grief he'd been suppressing. "We'll figure this out," Jack promised, restarting the snowmobile. "Whatever your mother found, whatever she was trying to protect, we'll make sure it wasn't in vain." As they set off across the frozen lake, the stars wheeled overhead in cold indifference, their light reaching them from distances so vast that human concerns, corporate secrets, government conspiracies, even death itself seemed momentary and insignificant by comparison. Yet Jack knew better than most that human actions, however small against the cosmic scale, could ripple outward with tremendous consequence. Whatever Dr. Melissa Gardner had discovered, it had cost her life and placed her son in terrible danger. Jack had spent 35 years wrestling with the consequences of speaking truth to power and failing to speak loudly enough. Perhaps this time, the outcome could be different. The snowmobile's engine echoed across the frozen landscape as they pressed onward through the night. Two unlikely allies against forces yet unseen, carrying a secret that powerful people would kill to protect. The hunting cabin was little more than a wooden shell with a stone fireplace, but it offered temporary shelter from the biting cold. Jack worked quickly to start a small fire, using the minimal amount of wood needed to provide warmth without creating a smoke signature visible for miles. Lucas sat on a wooden bench, exhaustion finally catching up to him as the adrenaline ebbed. His eyelids drooped, head nodding forward before he jerked himself awake again. "Rest," Jack told him, arranging an emergency blanket near the fire. "I'll keep watch. We move again in 2 hours." The boy didn't argue, curling onto his side with his backpack still clutched against his chest. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep, his face finally relaxing into something that matched his actual age. Jack settled by the cabin's single window, revolver at hand, gaze alternating between the moonlit terrain outside and the sleeping child. Questions circled in his mind like restless birds. Who was Melissa Gardner? And how had she known him? What exactly had she discovered that warranted such an aggressive response from Centauri? And most pressingly, what was the strange device her son carried as if summoned by his thoughts? The backpack at Lucas's side emitted a soft blue glow, visible even through the fabric. Jack moved closer, carefully unzipping the main compartment to reveal the watch-like device now illuminated with scrolling text. Proximity. Alert Centauri security systems detected initiating countermeasures accessing. Satellite uplink, transmitting location data to secure server. Jack stared at the screen, understanding dawning with cold clarity. The device wasn't merely storage media, it was active technology, responding to environmental threats autonomously. This was far beyond anything he'd expected, suggesting capabilities that shouldn't exist in current commercial technology. The screen flickered again. DNA match, confirmed Miller. John A. Capt. USAF Ret. Access granted. Would you like to view Project Phoenix files? Jack's breath caught. The device had somehow scanned and identified him, matching against records that should have been classified or long deleted. He glanced at Lucas, still sleeping soundly, then back at the glowing screen. Yes, he whispered, not certain if the device could hear him. The screen expanded or seemed to projecting a three-dimensional holographic display 6 inches above its surface. File directories appeared, organized in a complex tree structure. One folder blinked repeatedly. For Jack, open first. Jack selected it with a tentative finger, half expecting his hand to pass through the projection. Instead, the folder opened, revealing a video file. A woman's face appeared mid-40s, with intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and tension evident in the set of her jaw. Captain Miller, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. If you're watching this, I'm already dead, and Lucas has found you. I pray that's the case, because there's no one else I trust with what I've discovered. Jack glanced again at Lucas, confirming he was still asleep, then turned back to the recording. My name is Dr. Melissa Gardner. We've never met, but I've studied your work extensively. Your navigation algorithms from the Apollo program formed the foundation for my own work in predictive modeling at Centauri Technologies. She paused, swallowing hard. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was how our research was being weaponized under Project Phoenix. Melissa looked over her shoulder, as though fearful of being overheard, then continued with increased urgency. They've built a system that can predict and influence human behavior on a massive scale, not just marketing or social media manipulation. We're talking about voting patterns, financial markets, civil unrest. They're selling it to governments, corporations, anyone with enough money and power to afford it. Her voice cracked. And it works. Captain Miller, it works terrifyingly well because it's based on your original targeting systems. The same precision that could guide a spacecraft to the moon is now being used to guide specific thoughts into specific minds. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. His navigation systems had been revolutionary for their time, self-correcting algorithms that could process multiple variables simultaneously, adjusting course based on real-time feedback. But they'd been designed for objects in predictable orbital patterns, not human consciousness. I've collected everything, Melissa continued. System architecture, client lists, deployment data, internal communications. It's all here, encrypted and secured. The quantum processing core in this device can verify the data's authenticity beyond any legal challenge. She leaned closer to the camera. But they know I've taken it. Marcus Reed, Centauri's security chief, has already attempted to access my home systems, It's only a matter of time before they come for me directly. She glanced away again, blinking rapidly. Lucas is special. Captain, he's not just my son, he's the reason I discovered all this in the first place. They've been testing Phoenix components on children, measuring neural adaptability. Lucas was part of the study group before I pulled him out. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. The changes are permanent. His memory, his processing abilities. He's not like other children, and they'll want him back almost as much as they want this data. Jack looked at the sleeping boy with new understanding. His watchfulness, his composure, his precision of speech all suddenly contextualized. There's one more thing you need to know, Melissa said, her voice dropping further. Project Phoenix isn't just Centauri. There's government involvement at the highest levels. Department of Defense, intelligence agencies, regulatory bodies all compromised. You can't trust the normal channels. She straightened, composing herself with visible effort. I need you to get this information to someone who can use it properly. There's a journalist, Robert Thompson, at the Riverford Gazette. He used to be with the Washington Post before they pushed him out for investigating military contracts too aggressively. He has the connections to publish this safely. Her expression softened slightly. Lucas knows I recorded this message. He knows what might happen. Please keep him safe. He deserves a chance at a normal life after all this. She reached toward the camera. And Captain Miller, thank you for everything you tried to do before. Maybe this time, the truth will prevail. The recording ended, leaving Jack staring at the holographic display, mind racing with implications. If even half of what Melissa Gardner claimed was true, the situation was far more dangerous than he'd initially assessed. Not just corporate enforcers, but potentially government assets could be deployed against them. He closed the file, noticing dozens more organized into categories, technical specifications, deployment locations, test subjects, financial records, a trove of evidence documenting a conspiracy of staggering scale. Jack's first instinct was to delve deeper, to understand exactly what they were dealing with, but a sound outside froze him in place. The crunch of snow under a careful boot. Jack moved silently to the window, peering through frost-edged glass. In the moonlight, he could make out shapes moving through the trees, at least 3 figures in white winter camouflage, approaching with tactical precision. Lucas, he whispered urgently, shaking the boy's shoulder. Wake up. We need to move. Now. The boy came awake instantly, eyes focusing with unusual clarity for someone so young. He noted Jack's expression and the revolver in his hand, then nodded once, gathering his backpack without question. Back door, he whispered. Jack nodded toward a narrow exit on the cabin's western wall. Through there, then down to the lake. Stay low and move only when I signal. They extinguished the fire and gathered their minimal gear. Jack eased the back door open, wincing at the slight creak of rusted hinges. Outside, and the temperature had dropped further, the air so cold it burned the lungs with each breath. He scanned the tree line, confirming the approach was still from the east, then gestured for Lucas to follow. They crept from the cabin, using a shallow depression in the terrain for cover as they made their way toward the lake's edge. The snowmobile was hidden beneath pine boughs 50 yards away if they could reach it undetected. They still had a chance. A sudden shout from behind confirmed their escape had been noticed. Jack turned to see one of the white-clad figures pointing in their direction, the other 2 already changing course to intercept. Run, Jack urged, abandoning stealth for speed. They sprinted toward the concealed snowmobile, their boots crunching through crusted snow. Behind them, Jack heard the sharp reports of suppressed gunfire, bullets impacting the snow around them with soft puffs of crystallized water. Lucas reached the snowmobile first, tearing away the pine boughs with desperate energy. Jack was 3 steps behind when fire erupted in his left shoulder, a bullet finding its mark with precision. He stumbled but didn't fall, adrenaline temporarily masking the worst of the pain. Start the engine, he commanded, reaching the machine and all but throwing Lucas onto the seat. The boy fumbled with the ignition while Jack turned, revolver raised, firing 2 shots toward their pursuers. He wasn't aiming to kill at this distance. In these conditions, with his injury, precision was impossible. But the return fire forced the approaching figures to dive for cover, buying precious seconds. The snowmobile's engine roared to life. Jack holstered his weapon and swung onto the seat behind Lucas, his wounded arm protesting with white-hot pain. "Go!" he shouted, taking the handlebars with his good arm and twisting the throttle. They shot forward across the frozen lake, the machine's headlight cutting a bright swath through pre-dawn darkness. Behind them, more gunfire erupted, but they were already beyond effective range, the snowmobile's speed carrying them away from immediate danger. Jack steered one-handed, gritting his teeth against the pain radiating from his shoulder. Warm blood soaked his thermal suit, its heat almost pleasant against the freezing air, before it too began to cool and stiffen the fabric. "You're hurt," Lucas said, turning to look at him with wide eyes. "Flesh wound," Jack lied, knowing from experience it was worse. "Nothing that can't wait until we reach Peggy's." The boy didn't appear convinced, but faced forward again, leaning into the wind as they raced across the lake's exposed surface. Jack kept the throttle wide open, pushing the machine to its limits. Their pursuers would have their own transportation nearby. The lead they'd gained wouldn't last long. Dawn was breaking as they reached the lake's western shore, the sky lightening to a pale gray against which the pines stood in sharp relief. Jack guided them into the forest, following game trails and the occasional logging road, always trending southwest toward Riverford. After an hour of hard riding, the adrenaline began to fade, allowing pain to reassert itself with brutal intensity. Jack's vision tunneled, the edges darkening as shock set in. He reduced their speed, focusing on staying conscious and upright. "Not much further," he told Lucas, though in truth, they still had 20 miles to cover. The boy glanced back again, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "I can drive if you need to rest," he offered. Jack managed a pained smile. "Not yet, but I appreciate the offer." They continued through deepening forest, the terrain growing more challenging as they descended from the mountains toward the valley floor. The snowmobile's track left an unmistakable trail, but Jack lacked the strength or resources to conceal it. Their only hope lay in speed and the possibility that Peggy's farm remained unknown to their pursuers. By mid-morning, Jack was operating on pure willpower. Blood loss and exposure had taken their toll, leaving him lightheaded and nauseous. Only Lucas's small form pressed against him kept him upright on the snowmobile. The boy somehow understanding the situation and positioning himself to provide stability. When they finally broke from the tree line to see Riverford Valley spread below, Jack nearly wept with relief. The small town lay nestled along a winding river, surrounded by farmland now blanketed in snow. On the outskirts, just visible from their elevated position, stood a cluster of greenhouses glinting in the winter sun, Peggy's organic operation, Wilson Family Farms. "Almost there," Jack murmured, as much to himself as to Lucas. They descended carefully, following a winding path toward the valley floor. The snowmobile's fuel gauge hovered near empty, the engine occasionally sputtering in protest at the extended hard use. Jack nursed it along, coaxing the last miles from the failing machine. When the first greenhouse came into view, the snowmobile gave a final cough and died, its fuel exhausted. They coasted the last 100 yards on momentum alone, coming to rest near a weathered barn painted a cheerful red with white trim. "We walk from here," Jack said, dismounting with effort. Lucas hurried to his side, providing unexpected but welcome support as Jack swayed dangerously. Together, they made their way toward the main house, a 2-story craftsman with a wide front porch and smoke curling from its chimney. Before they reached the steps, the front door swung open to reveal a woman in her mid-60s, silver hair cut in a practical bob, wearing jeans, work boots, and a heavy flannel shirt. She held a shotgun with the casual competence of someone who'd grown up with firearms. "That's far enough," she called, leveling the weapon. "State your business." Jack managed a weak smile. "Hello, Peggy. Been a while." The woman's stern expression faltered, recognition dawning. Jack Miller. She lowered the shotgun, eyes widening as she took in his blood-soaked clothing and the child supporting him. My God, what happened to you? Long story, Jack replied, his voice fading as the last reserves of his strength ebbed. Need your help. Both of us do. Margaret Wilson dropped the shotgun on the porch and rushed forward just as Jack's knees buckled. She caught him with surprising strength, easing him to the ground while examining the wound with practiced eyes. Gunshot, she diagnosed grimly. Clean through and through. But you've lost a lot of blood. She glanced at Lucas, who stood watching with that same eerie composure. And who might you be, young man? Lucas Gardner, he replied. My mom was Dr. Melissa Gardner. She worked for Centauri Technologies. They killed her, and now they're trying to kill us too. Peggy's expression hardened at the mention of Centauri. Of course they are, she muttered. Those vultures have been on my radar for years. She turned back to Jack, who was struggling to remain conscious. Let's get you inside before you bleed out on my driveway. Then you can tell me exactly what kind of hornet's nest you've kicked this time. With Lucas's help, she got Jack to his feet and guided him toward the house. As they crossed the threshold into warmth and temporary safety, Jack felt the weight of responsibility pressing down alongside the pain and exhaustion. They'd escaped the immediate threat, but Marcus Reed wouldn't stop hunting them. The device in Lucas's backpack represented too great a threat to whatever Centauri had built. And somewhere behind them, in the vast winter wilderness, Reed's operatives were already closing the distance, following the snowmobile's trail with relentless determination. The next confrontation, Jack knew with grim certainty, would not end with another narrow escape. The race had only just begun, and the stakes were far higher than his own survival. As darkness claimed his consciousness, Jack's last thought was of Melissa Gardner's final words on the recording. Maybe this time, the truth will prevail. Margaret Wilson's hands worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning and bandaging Jack's shoulder wound while Lucas watched from a nearby chair. The farmhouse kitchen had been transformed into a makeshift medical station, the wooden table covered with sterile pads, gauze, antiseptic, and surgical tools that looked suspiciously professional for a simple organic farmer. You're lucky, Peggy muttered, tightening a final suture. Bullet missed the major blood vessels, half an inch to the right, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Jack propped upright and fortified with whiskey, managed a weak smile. Always did have the devil's own luck. That what you call it? Peggy arched an eyebrow, reaching for a clean bandage. Because from where I'm sitting, getting shot while on the run with a child looks more like the opposite of luck. Lucas, who had been silent during the procedure, finally spoke. It's my fault. They're after me after what my mom gave me. Peggy's eyes softened as she turned to the boy. I doubt that very much, young man. In my experience, when corporations like Centauri come gunning for people, the responsibility lies squarely with them, not their victims. She secured Jack's bandage with medical tape. Now, how about we start at the beginning, and don't leave anything out. I need the full picture. Over the next hour, Jack and Lucas took turns explaining everything: Lucas's arrival at the workshop, the drone surveillance, Marcus Reed's initial confrontation, their escape through the mountains, and finally, the device with Melissa Gardner's recorded message. Peggy listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. When they finished, she walked to the kitchen window, gazing out at the snow-covered farm as though expecting to see Centauri's forces already surrounding them. You've stepped into something bigger than you realize, she said finally. Centauri Technologies isn't just another defense contractor. They've been positioning themselves at the intersection of big tech, military applications, and government influence for over a decade. She turned back to face them. I spent the last 5 years of my Justice Department career trying to build an antitrust case against them. Every time we got close, witnesses disappeared, evidence vanished, or judges suddenly recused themselves. You think they were using this Project Phoenix even then? Jack asked. I didn't have a name for it. But yes, Peggy nodded. We observed patterns that couldn't be explained by normal corporate influence. Opinion shifts that happened too quickly, too precisely targeted. Decision makers who changed lifelong positions overnight. She sighed. My team documented everything, presented it to the Attorney General, and I was retired the following week. With honors, of course, a gold watch and a generous pension. Lucas pulled the device from his backpack, its surface now dark and dormant. Can we look at more of what's on here? Maybe there's something that explains how they're doing it? Peggy hesitated. Is it secure if it accessed satellite systems before? It might be trackable. Mom said it has countermeasures, Lucas explained. It only connects when it needs to, and it bounces signals through multiple satellites and servers. That's why they need the actual device. They can't hack it remotely. Jack straightened, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. Let's see what else Dr. Gardner left us. Lucas placed the device on the kitchen table, touching its smooth surface with his fingertip. It immediately illuminated, recognizing his contact, then expanded its holographic display upward. Show us the technical specifications for Project Phoenix, Jack requested. The hologram reconfigured into a complex three-dimensional schematic, a network architecture unlike anything Jack had seen before. At its center pulsed a red-orange core labeled Quantum Processing Array, with tendrils extending outward to various subsystems, behavioral prediction engine, media distribution network, neural response modulator, and dozens more. My God, Peggy whispered, leaning closer. It's not just monitoring systems, it's active intervention. Jack studied the schematic, his engineer's mind automatically analyzing data flows and feedback loops. This goes beyond anything I've ever seen. They've created an AI system that doesn't just predict human behavior, it shapes it. Look here. He pointed to a subsystem labeled Tailored Content Delivery. This matches specific messages to psychological profiles, delivering precisely calibrated content to influence decision-making without triggering awareness? Lucas nodded. Mom said they started with social media and news sites, but now they're in smart devices, streaming services, even electronic billboards. Anything with a screen or speaker. And people don't realize they're being manipulated, Peggy asked. That's the key innovation, Jack said grimly, indicating another subsystem. This subliminal encoding matrix. It embeds influence patterns below conscious perception thresholds. You see what you expect to see, hear what you expect to hear. But there's an additional layer working directly on your subconscious. Based on what, though? Peggy frowned. How do they know what will influence specific individuals? Lucas touched the display again, bringing up a new section labeled Data Acquisition. They have everything, he said quietly. Every text message, email, search query, purchase, medical record, travel history, but also real-time data heart rate from fitness trackers, voice patterns from smart speakers, facial expressions from security cameras. They know more about how people will react than people know themselves. Jack felt a chill run through him as the full implications became clear. This isn't just corporate manipulation or government surveillance. It's a fundamental reshaping of human autonomy. And it's already deployed, Peggy added, pointing to a global map that had appeared in the display, showing thousands of connection points pulsing with artificial life. Look at the concentration around capital cities, financial centers. And these red ones, Lucas pointed, are what Mom called priority influence zones, areas where they're actively manipulating outcomes. Elections, regulatory decisions, judicial appointments. Peggy straightened, her expression hardening with resolve. We need to get this to Robert Thompson immediately. The Riverford Gazette isn't the Washington Post, but Bob still has connections to major outlets. With evidence this concrete, even Centauri can't suppress it completely. Jack nodded, though concern creased his features. Reed's people will be following our trail. We probably have a few hours at most before they track us here. Then we move quickly, Peggy said, already reaching for her phone. I'll call Bob, arrange a meeting somewhere secure. Meanwhile, she glanced at Lucas. That device stays powered down unless absolutely necessary. No emissions, no signals, nothing they could trace. Lucas nodded, shutting down the holographic display with a touch. The device went dark, once again resembling an oversized watch. You should rest, Peggy told Jack, noting the pallor beneath his weathered tan. You've lost blood, and we need you functional. There's a guest room upstairs. Lucas can take the room next to it. Jack wanted to argue but found he lacked the energy. The adrenaline that had carried him through their escape had long since dissipated, leaving bone-deep fatigue in its wake. Wake me in 2 hours, he insisted. Not a minute later. 4 hours, and Peggy countered. Reed's men are good, but even they can't move that fast through mountain terrain in winter. We have time. Jack reluctantly agreed, allowing Lucas to help him upstairs to a simply furnished guest room. The bed felt impossibly soft after their journey, and despite his determination to remain alert, sleep claimed him almost immediately. He woke to the sound of hushed voices and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, Jack thought he was back in his cabin. Then the events of the past 24 hours crashed back with painful clarity. A glance at the bedside clock confirmed he'd slept nearly 5 hours. Damn it, Peggy, he muttered, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His shoulder protested with a flash of fire as he pulled on a clean flannel shirt Peggy had left for him, her late husband's. He guessed, noting the substantial fit across his frame. He moved carefully down the stairs, following the voices to the kitchen. Peggy and Lucas sat at the table with a third person, a man in his early 70s with a shock of white hair and wire-rimmed glasses, dressed in rumpled corduroy and a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches. He looked up as Jack entered, revealing a face mapped with the deep lines of someone who had spent decades squinting at fine print. The Sleeping Beauty awakens, the man said, rising to extend a hand. Bob Thompson, Peggy tells me you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest. Jack shook the offered hand, sizing up the former Washington Post editor. Thompson had the sharp, evaluating gaze of a career journalist, someone accustomed to sifting truth from fiction under pressure. Should have woken me sooner, Jack directed at Peggy, who merely shrugged. You needed the rest, and we needed time to formulate a plan. She pushed a mug of coffee toward him. Bob's been briefed on the situation and seen some of the evidence, Thompson added, gesturing to Lucas's device, now dark on the table. Most extraordinary material I've encountered in 50 years of journalism, if even half of it checks out. We're looking at the biggest abuse of power since Watergate, maybe bigger. Jack lowered himself carefully into a chair. It checks out, he confirmed. I've seen enough of the technical specifications to verify that. The system architecture is revolutionary but feasible with current technology, and it builds on principles I'm intimately familiar with. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. The question is how to release it for maximum impact while minimizing risk. Centauri has already demonstrated they're willing to kill to keep this quiet. We need multiple simultaneous releases, Peggy suggested. Too many outlets for them to suppress or discredit all at once. Agreed, Thompson said. I've spent the last hour making discreet calls to trusted colleagues at major publications, people I trust with my life. Each will receive a complete data package with a coordinated publication time. He turned to Lucas. But for that, we need to access the device again, create secure copies. Lucas looked to Jack, seeking permission. When Jack nodded, the boy activated the device once more, its holographic display illuminating the kitchen with ethereal blue light. The quantum encryption is unbreakable, Lucas explained, navigating through file structures with the facility of someone far older. But Mom built in a distribution protocol. We can create 5 authenticated copies that will verify as original source material. Thompson watched with undisguised fascination as Lucas worked. Remarkable, he murmured. Both the technology and the young man operating it. Jack caught Peggy's eye across the table, silently communicating his concern. Lucas's abilities were clearly beyond normal evidence of whatever Centauri had done to him as part of their testing program. The boy had become a living embodiment of the very technology they were fighting against. "How long will this process take?" Jack asked. "About 20 minutes," Lucas replied, not looking up from his work. "The device has to verify the integrity of each copy." Jack nodded, turning to Thompson. "Once we have the copies, what's the distribution plan?" "Physical handoff." Thompson shook his head. "Too risky with Centauri actively hunting us. I've arranged for secure digital transmission from multiple locations using one-time encryption keys and dark web protocols." A faint smile touched his lips. "Some old dogs can learn new tricks, especially with the right motivation." "And after the story breaks," Peggy asked, "what then?" A somber silence fell over the table. Thompson removed his glasses, polishing them methodically with a handkerchief before responding. "Best case scenario, federal investigations, congressional hearings, international regulatory action. Centauri's stock collapses. Executives face criminal charges. Project Phoenix is dismantled." He replaced his glasses. "Worst case, Centauri uses Phoenix itself to discredit the story, paint us as conspiracy theorists, and accelerate their takeover of democratic institutions." "There's a third option," Lucas said quietly, his hands still moving across the holographic controls. "Mom built a kill switch into the system. She called it Firebreak, a virus that can propagate through Phoenix's own architecture, corrupting its core algorithms and rendering the influence modules ineffective." Three pairs of adult eyes fixed on the boy with varying degrees of shock. "Your mother created a backdoor into the most sophisticated behavioral modification system ever built?" Thompson asked, incredulity evident in his voice. Lucas nodded. "She was the lead architect for the neural response modules. Nobody understood the system's fundamental structure better than she did." A shadow crossed his young face. "But she said activating Firebreak would require direct access to a Phoenix deployment node. We'd have to physically infiltrate a Centauri facility." Jack exchanged glances with Peggy and Thompson, the unspoken assessment passing between them: impossible, suicidal, a last resort option only. "Let's focus on the immediate plan," Jack redirected. "Get the data copies distributed, coordinate the story release, and keep Lucas safe in the meantime." Thompson nodded agreement. "I've arranged secure transportation to Portland. From there, we can—" He was interrupted by a sharp beeping from Lucas's device. The holographic display flashed red, shifting to a topographical map of the surrounding area, with multiple moving points converging on their location. "Proximity alert," Lucas said, fear edging into his voice for the first time. Centauri security systems detected 3 vehicles approaching from the north, 2 from the east. Peggy was on her feet instantly, moving to a window. "How did they find us so quickly?" "The snowmobile trail would have led them to Riverford," Jack said, mentally calculating distances and timing. "After that, they just need to ask the right questions in town. Your farm isn't exactly inconspicuous." "Or they're tracking us another way," Lucas suggested, studying the display. "Mom said they have access to satellite imagery, cell networks, even power grid fluctuations." Thompson gathered his notebook and pen. "How long until they arrive?" 15 minutes, maybe less," Lucas reported grimly. "Not enough time to finish the data copies," Jack concluded, rising from his chair with fresh urgency. "We need to move. Now!" Peggy was already in motion, pulling open a drawer to retrieve a revolver similar to Jack's. "I have a truck in the barn modified for off-road use. We can take the back way through the orchards, cut across to State Highway 16. "They'll have the roads watched," Jack warned. "Not all of them," Peggy countered. "There's an old logging road that connects to my neighbor's property. Phil Thornton retired Forest Service. He'll help us." Lucas shut down the device, returning it to his backpack. "What about the data copies?" "We'll complete them en route," Thompson promised. "I have equipment in my car that can establish a secure connection once we're clear." Jack checked the load in his own revolver. grimacing at the limited ammunition. 5 against what's likely a small army. Not ideal odds. 6, actually, came a new voice from the doorway. They turned to see a man in his mid-50s with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, wearing a flannel shirt, work jeans, and a Carhartt jacket. He held a lever-action rifle with casual competence. Samuel Foster, he introduced himself with a nod. Former Centauri engineer. Peggy called me while you were sleeping. He gestured toward Lucas's backpack. Figured you could use someone who knows how Phoenix works from the inside. Jack assessed the newcomer with narrow-eyed suspicion. How do we know we can trust you? Because Centauri tried to have me killed last year when I raised ethical concerns about the behavioral modification modules. Foster replied evenly. I've been living off the grid since then, helping Peggy document their activities. He extended his free hand. Melissa Gardner was a colleague and friend. I owe her this much. After a moment's hesitation, Jack accepted the handshake. Another ally was welcome, especially one with insider knowledge of their adversary. We move in 2 vehicles, Peggy decided, taking command with the assurance of someone accustomed to crisis management. Jack, Lucas, and I in my truck. Bob and Samuel take Bob's car, different routes to Phil's place. If one group is intercepted, the other keeps going. Jack nodded approval, impressed by her tactical thinking. Lawyer, farmer, and apparently resistance organizer Margaret Wilson contained multitudes he was only beginning to appreciate. They moved quickly, gathering essential supplies and weapons. Peggy led them through a mudroom to a rear exit, avoiding the front of the house now that Centauri's forces could be watching. The barn stood 50 yards away, a weathered structure large enough to house farm equipment and, evidently, Peggy's escape vehicle. Stay low, she instructed as they crossed the open ground, snow crunching beneath their boots. Inside the barn, Jack saw what Peggy meant by modified for off-road use, a 1980s Ford pickup raised on oversized tires, with a reinforced chassis and what appeared to be armor plating welded to the doors. Vietnam-era flak jacket material, she explained, catching his questioning look. Lighter than steel, stops most small arms fire. You've been preparing for this, Jack realized. Peggy offered a grim smile. Let's just say retirement gave me time to indulge some paranoid hobbies. She pressed a remote, and the barn's rear doors swung open automatically, revealing a narrow track leading toward an apple orchard. Lucas rides in the middle, head down, stay below window level as much as possible. They climbed into the truck, Peggy behind the wheel, Lucas between them. In the rearview mirror, Jack saw Thompson and Foster heading for a nondescript sedan, parked at the side of the barn. Ready? Peggy asked, inserting the key. Jack checked his revolver one final time, then nodded. As will ever be. The truck's engine roared to life, and Peggy accelerated down the track, snow spraying from the oversized tires. They bounced across uneven terrain, the orchard's bare trees flashing past like skeletal sentinels. In the side mirror, Jack caught a glimpse of black SUVs turning onto the farm's main entrance road, still distant but closing fast. Their brief respite was over. The hunt had resumed. The truck powered through the orchard, branches scraping against the reinforced windshield as Peggy navigated between rows with practiced precision. Behind them, Thompson and Foster followed in the sedan, struggling to maintain pace on the rough terrain. Lucas crouched low in the seat, the backpack clutched protectively against his chest. There, Peggy pointed toward a gap in the tree line where her property met neighboring land. Once we cross that fence line, we'll be on Phil's 500 acres, mostly forest, with old logging roads running throughout. Jack braced himself as the truck bounced over a drainage ditch, his injured shoulder protesting with each impact. And this Phil, he's trustworthy. 30 years Forest Service, environmental activist, and no love lost for corporations like Centauri, Peggy confirmed. Plus, he has a collection of Vietnam-era firearms that would make a militia leader blush. They broke from the orchard into open pasture, the truck gaining speed on firmer ground. A quarter-mile ahead stood a weathered fence line, and beyond it, dense pine forest climbing into foothills. Jack allowed himself a moment of hope if they could reach those woods. Their chances of evasion improved significantly. The hope died as a black helicopter crested the ridge above the forest, its rotors slashing through the winter air as it banked sharply toward them. "They brought air support," Jack said grimly, tracking the aircraft's approach. Peggy swore under her breath, pushing the accelerator to the floor. "That changes things. Phil's place won't be safe if they can track us from above." The helicopter closed distance rapidly, hovering 100 feet above and slightly behind them. Jack expected gunfire, but none came instead. A powerful spotlight activated, pinning their truck in its beam. "They want the device intact," he realized aloud. "They're trying to force us to stop." Lucas looked up, fear evident in his eyes despite his remarkable composure. "There's something else," he said, reaching into his backpack for the device. "Mom said they might try to use sonic weapons directed audio that can incapacitate without physical damage." As if on cue, Jack felt, rather than heard, a pressure building in his ears, a subsonic vibration that sent waves of discomfort through his skull. Beside him, Peggy winced, momentarily losing focus as she fought to maintain control of the vehicle. Lucas activated the device, its surface illuminating with urgent red warnings. "They're targeting us with a long-range acoustic device, LRAD, military grade." His fingers danced across the holographic controls. "Mom built-in countermeasures. Activating now." The device emitted a pulse of energy that Jack felt, rather than saw, a ripple through the air that caused the pressure in his head to ease immediately. Above them, the helicopter wavered, its spotlight flickering before stabilizing again. "What did you do?" Peggy asked, amazed. "Electromagnetic interference," Lucas explained. "Disrupts their targeting systems temporarily. Won't stop them for long, though." They had reached the fence line, the truck crashing through wooden posts without slowing. The forest loomed ahead, offering potential cover from aerial pursuit. Behind them, Thompson's sedan had fallen back, taking a different route around the pasture's edge, dividing their targets. As planned. The helicopter pilot seemed to recognize their strategy, breaking off to follow the sedan instead. Jack watched with mounting concern as the aircraft descended toward Thompson and Foster, positioning itself directly in their path. "They're going to force them off the road," he warned. Peggy nodded grimly. "Bob knows these lands almost as well as I do. He'll find a way through." The sedan abruptly veered left, abandoning the pasture for what appeared to be a dry creek bed running between steep banks too narrow for the helicopter to follow closely. The pilot hesitated, then swung back toward Peggy's truck just as they entered the tree line. Pine branches scraped the roof as Peggy navigated a winding logging road, barely wide enough for the vehicle. The helicopter's spotlight dappled through the canopy, struggling to maintain consistent illumination through the dense foliage. "We might actually make it," Jack allowed himself to think, watching the aircraft's increasingly desperate attempts to track them through the trees. The thought had barely formed when the road ahead exploded in a shower of dirt and splintered wood, not from the helicopter, but from the muzzle flash of a high-powered rifle positioned on the ridgeline to their right. Peggy swerved violently, nearly sending them into a massive pine trunk. "Snipers!" she spat, regaining control. "They've got the high ground covered." Another shot rang out, this one puncturing the hood and sending steam hissing from the radiator. The truck's engine coughed, losing power even as Peggy coaxed every remaining ounce of performance from it. "We can't outrun them," Jack concluded, making rapid calculations. "Not with the engine damaged. We need a defensive position." Peggy nodded agreement, her eyes scanning the forest for options. "There's an old fire lookout tower about half a mile ahead. Stone base, good visibility, defensible approach." "Head there," Jack decided. "Lucas, any more tricks in that device that might help us?" The boy was already working the holographic controls. "It can generate false heat signatures, might confuse their thermal imaging, and it has limited jamming capabilities for their communications." Do it, Jack instructed, checking his revolver again. 6 rounds remaining, not enough for a prolonged engagement, but perhaps enough to buy time for Thompson and Foster to reach safety with the data. The truck limped forward, steam billowing from its damaged radiator. The engine's growl reduced to a labored wheeze. Through gaps in the canopy, Jack could see the helicopter circling, its spotlight sweeping methodically across the forest below. There! Peggy pointed toward a stone structure rising above the tree line, the fire lookout, perched atop a rocky outcropping that provided commanding views of the surrounding terrain. They abandoned the failing truck 100 yards from the tower, continuing on foot through deep snow. Jack moved with difficulty, his injured shoulder throbbing with each step, but adrenaline kept him upright and moving. Lucas stayed between them, the precious device secure in his backpack. The lookout tower had clearly been abandoned for years, its wooden upper sections partially collapsed. But the stone base remained solid, a 12-foot square structure with narrow windows and a single reinforced door. They hurried inside, Peggy immediately moving to secure the entrance while Jack checked the windows. 2 minutes, maybe less, before they reach our position, he estimated, noting movement among the distant trees. Peggy nodded grimly, positioning herself at a window with her revolver ready. I count at least 8 approaching from the north and east. Probably more we can't see. Lucas activated the device again, its holographic display confirming Peggy's assessment and adding new information. There are communications between the ground teams and someone they're calling Eagle One. Sounds like Marcus Reed is coordinating from the helicopter. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Reed had anticipated their moves with uncomfortable precision, deploying resources to cut off escape routes they hadn't even chosen yet. It suggested either extraordinary tactical intuition or inside information. Any sign of Thompson and Foster? He asked. Lucas studied the display, then shook his head. Nothing within sensor range. They might have gotten clear, or been captured, Peggy added softly, voicing what they all feared. Outside, the helicopter's spotlight swept across the lookout tower, momentarily flooding the interior with harsh white light before continuing its search pattern. Voices carried on the cold air, terse commands as Reed's team established a perimeter. Jack Miller, the amplified voice boomed from a loudspeaker mounted on the helicopter. We have the tower surrounded. There is no escape route. Surrender the device and the boy, and you and Ms. Wilson will be permitted to leave unharmed. Jack exchanged glances with Peggy, both recognizing the lie. Reed had no intention of leaving witnesses to Centauri's operations. What do we do? Lucas whispered, fear finally breaking through his remarkable composure. Jack placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. We hold position and wait for an opening. Thompson and Foster may have reached help by now. He didn't truly believe it, but the boy needed hope to cling to. I need to tell you something, Lucas said suddenly, his voice dropping lower. About the device, about what Mom really built into it. Peggy moved closer, still keeping watch on the approaching forces. What is it? Lucas. The boy took a deep breath. The firebreak protocol I mentioned, it doesn't just disable Phoenix. It can reverse the influence patterns, make people see the truth instead of the manipulated reality. His eyes met Jack's with an intensity beyond his years. But activating it requires a specific genetic signature, Mom's or mine. That's the real reason they want me back so badly. I'm not just a test subject. I'm a key. Jack absorbed this revelation, understanding dawning with painful clarity. Your mother built you into the system as a failsafe. If anything happened to her, I would be the only one who could activate Firebreak, Lucas confirmed. But I need to be within range of a primary node, and I need the device. Peggy's expression hardened. That's not happening. We're not delivering you to Centauri's doorstep. We might not have a choice, Jack countered, the tactical situation growing clearer in his mind. They have us surrounded, outgunned, with no extraction plan. He turned to Lucas. Where's the nearest primary node? Portland, the boy replied immediately. Underneath their regional headquarters. Mom showed me the schematics. Outside, Reed's men had formed a tight perimeter around the tower, visible through the windows as dark shapes moving between trees. The helicopter maintained position overhead, its spotlight now fixed steadily on the stone structure. Final warning, Miller! Reed's amplified voice echoed across the forest. Surrender now, or we will take action to retrieve the device by force. Jack moved to the window, calculating angles and approaches. They want to take us alive if possible. That gives us a narrow advantage. He turned to Peggy and Lucas. I have a plan, but you're not going to like it. 5 minutes later, the lookout tower's door swung open. Jack emerged slowly, hands raised above his head, revolver dangling from one finger to show non-hostile intent. Reed, he called into the darkness. Let's talk. The helicopter's spotlight immediately fixed on him, the brightness nearly blinding after the tower's dim interior. From the tree line, multiple laser sights appeared as dots of red light dancing across Jack's chest. That's far enough. Miller, Reed's voice came from nearby, no longer amplified but carrying naturally in the winter air. The security chief stepped into view, flanked by 2 operatives with raised assault rifles. Unlike his men, Reed carried only a pistol, held casually at his side. Where's the boy and the device? Safe, Jack replied, maintaining his position. For now, Reed's expression remained neutral, professional. You've led us on quite a chase, Captain. Impressive for a man of your age, but it ends here. Maybe, Jack conceded. Depends on what you're really after. You know what we want. The device, yes, but more importantly, the system it can compromise. Jack lowered his hand slightly, watching for a reaction from Reed's men. Project Phoenix, quite the achievement. Technological mind control on a global scale, disguised as advertising algorithms and content recommendations. Reed's eyebrow twitched the first crack in his composed exterior. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I, Jack pressed. Quantum processing cores running behavioral prediction models based on massive data harvesting, neural response modulators embedded in everyday content, subliminal encoding matrices that bypass conscious awareness. He smiled thinly. Did I miss anything? A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Reed's face before he masked it. You've been misinformed by a mentally unstable woman. Dr. Gardner suffered a breakdown after her son participated in a standard neurological study. Everything else is paranoid fantasy. Then why bring helicopters and tactical teams to capture a 70-year-old mechanic and a 10-year-old boy? Jack challenged. Seems excessive for recovering stolen property. Reed stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're an intelligent man. Captain Miller, you understand how power works in this world. Projects like Phoenix have existed in various forms for decades. MK Ultra, Operation Mockingbird, Prism. The only difference is scale and effectiveness. And moral restraint, Jack added coldly. A humorless smile touched Reed's lips. Morality is a luxury for those who don't understand the real threats we face. Hostile foreign powers are developing similar systems. Would you prefer they deploy first? At least Centauri operates within a framework of Western democratic values. Is that what you tell yourself at night? Jack asked. That you're the lesser evil? Reed's expression hardened. I'm a patriot who understands that freedom is maintained through control. Now, his tone shifted to one of finality. Where is the boy and the device? Jack glanced toward the helicopter hovering overhead, then back to Reed. I have a counter-proposal. Take me to Portland to Centauri headquarters. Let me see this Phoenix system for myself. If it's truly as benign as you claim, perhaps we can reach an understanding. Suspicion narrowed Reed's eyes. And why would I agree to that? Because the boy and the device will be delivered to you there, Jack said, the lie sliding easily from his lips. They're no longer here, Ms. Wilson evacuated them through a tunnel system beneath the tower while we've been talking. Former Forest Service emergency shelters, connected to a maintenance road 2 miles east. Reed's hand tightened on his pistol, and for a moment, Jack thought he might have overplayed his hand. Then the security chief touched his earpiece, listening to information Jack couldn't hear. Thermal imaging shows only one heat signature in the tower, Reed confirmed, studying Jack with newfound intensity. Where did you send them? To people who will keep the evidence secure unless I contact them within 12 hours. Jack improvised. Take me to Portland. Show me Phoenix. Convince me it's not the threat Dr. Gardner believed it to be. If you succeed, I'll arrange the return of both the boy and the device. Reed considered this offer, weighing options and risks with visible calculation. Finally, he nodded. A bold gambit. Captain, but you're operating under a misapprehension if you think you have leverage here. Before Jack could respond, a sharp pain erupted in his neck, a tranquilizer dart fired from somewhere in the darkness. He staggered, fighting to remain conscious as the powerful sedative flooded his system. Still, Reed continued, watching dispassionately as Jack sank to his knees. I am curious what you hope to accomplish by coming to Portland voluntarily, so I'll indulge this particular move. He gestured to his men. Secure him for transport, and keep searching the surrounding area. The boy and Wilson can't have gotten far. As darkness claimed him, Jack's last conscious thought was of Peggy and Lucas, hidden not in some fictional tunnel system, but in a cramped storage space beneath the tower's floor, exactly where Reed's thermal imaging couldn't penetrate due to the stone's insulating properties. It was a desperate gamble, but their only chance lay in making Reed believe they had escaped, drawing his focus and forces toward Portland. The rest would depend on Peggy's resourcefulness, Lucas's remarkable abilities, and whatever help Thompson and Foster might still provide if they remained free and alive. Jack surrendered to unconsciousness with the cold certainty that when he next opened his eyes, he would be deep within the heart of Centauri Technologies, face to face with a system that threatened to reshape human autonomy itself. He awakened to the antiseptic smell of a medical facility, clean, cold, and unnervingly sterile. Jack kept his eyes closed, assessing his situation through other senses first. He was seated upright in what felt like a comfortable chair, not restrained, but not entirely mobile either. His injured shoulder had been professionally treated, the deep ache replaced by localized numbness, suggesting a proper medical procedure rather than Peggy's field dressing. Nearby, someone was typing on a keyboard, rapid, efficient keystrokes that spoke of expertise and purpose. Beyond that, the faint hum of advanced environmental systems and electronic equipment created a white noise backdrop. Jack finally opened his eyes to find himself in a room unlike anything he'd expected. Not a cell or interrogation chamber, but what appeared to be a high-tech medical suite combined with an executive office. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of Portland's skyline, the city lights glittering against a night sky. Heavy snowfall created a curtain of white beyond the glass, partially obscuring distant buildings. Welcome back, Captain Miller. The voice came from a woman seated behind a glass desk, her attention on a holographic display similar to the one projected by Lucas's device, though larger and more elaborate. She appeared to be in her early 60s, with steel gray hair cut in a precise bob, wearing a charcoal suit that radiated authority. When she looked up, her eyes sharp, analytical, and utterly without warmth fixed on Jack with unsettling intensity. Eleanor Vance, Jack identified her, remembering Lucas's mention of the name. Former intelligence officer, current CEO of Centauri Technologies. A thin smile acknowledged his recognition. And former colleague, though our paths never directly crossed at NASA. I was in advanced planning while you were still working on Apollo navigation systems. She dismissed the holographic display with a gesture. Your work laid the foundation for much of what we've accomplished since. Jack tested his limbs, confirming his earlier assessment not physically restrained, but sluggish from lingering sedatives. Where's Marcus Reed? Coordinating the search for young Lucas and Ms. Wilson, Eleanor replied calmly. Though I expect that's precisely what you intended when you surrendered to draw our attention and resources away from them. She rose from her desk, moving with the fluid grace of someone half her age, and approached a wall of monitors displaying various data streams, surveillance feeds, and what appeared to be neural activity patterns. "You wanted to see Phoenix," she continued, touching a control panel. "I thought you deserved a proper introduction, given your unwitting contribution to its development." The monitors reconfigured, merging into a unified display that flowered outward in a three-dimensional representation of global information networks. At its core pulsed the same quantum processing array Jack had seen in Lucas's device, but vastly larger and more complex. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Eleanor asked, genuine pride in her voice. "The most sophisticated prediction and influence system ever created, capable of analyzing trillions of data points in real time, identifying behavioral patterns invisible to human perception, and applying precisely calibrated nudges that guide decision-making without triggering awareness." Jack studied the display, engineer's mind automatically assessing data flows and system architecture. "You've weaponized social psychology. We've optimized social cohesion," Eleanor corrected, "reduced conflict, prevented extremism, stabilized markets, guided policy toward sustainable outcomes." "Phoenix doesn't control people. Captain, it merely helps them make better choices." "Better by whose definition?" Jack challenged, struggling to sit straighter despite his medicated state. "Yours, Centauri's board of directors, the highest bidder." Eleanor's expression remained impassive. "By the definition of those who understand the existential threats facing human civilization, climate collapse, nuclear proliferation, resource depletion, ideological extremism, we're addressing challenges that democratic processes have repeatedly failed to solve." "By eliminating the democratic process itself," Jack countered, "removing genuine choice." "Choice is an illusion, Captain," Eleanor said dismissively. "Human decisions are determined by biochemistry, past experience, environmental factors, and cognitive biases. Phoenix simply acknowledges this reality and applies gentle correction where necessary." Jack gestured toward the display. "There's nothing gentle about what you're doing. You're restructuring human cognition itself, creating a world where dissent is neurologically impossible." For the first time, a flash of genuine emotion crossed Eleanor's face. Not anger, but something closer to disappointment. "I expected you, of all people, to understand. You witnessed firsthand how human cognitive failures led to the Challenger disaster, how groupthink, pressure to conform, and institutional inertia overrode rational decision-making. 7 lives lost because humans couldn't overcome their psychological limitations." The reference struck with precision, reopening old wounds. "You don't know anything about what happened," Jack said, voice tight. "I know everything about it," Eleanor countered. "Your warnings about the O-ring failures, the pressure from administration officials to maintain the launch schedule, the compromises made by managers who should have known better." She stepped closer. "How many nights have you lain awake, wondering if you could have done more, said it differently, found someone who would listen?" Jack remained silent, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of confirmation. "Phoenix prevents such failures," Eleanor continued, turning back to the display. "It identifies dangerous cognitive patterns before they manifest in catastrophic decisions. It's the system you needed in 1986, a safeguard against human fallibility." "At the cost of human agency," Jack responded. "You're not preventing failure, you're preventing choice itself." Eleanor sighed, as though explaining a simple concept to a particularly slow student. "Agency is maintained. People still feel they're making their own decisions. They simply make better ones under Phoenix's guidance." "Like the judges who mysteriously recused themselves from Peggy Wilson's antitrust case against Centauri?" Jack asked. "Or the witnesses who disappeared were those better decisions too?" Something hardened in Eleanor's expression. "Necessary adjustments to prevent destabilization of critical systems? Ms. Wilson's misguided crusade threatened technologies vital to national security, and Melissa Gardner was her death a necessary adjustment as well." Eleanor returned to her desk, touching a control that brought up a new display surveillance footage showing a car plunging from a mountain road, bursting into flames on impact. Dr. Gardner's death was genuinely accidental, she said, studying the footage dispassionately. The influence modules were programmed to encourage her to abandon her investigation, not eliminate her. Unfortunately, she proved remarkably resistant to Phoenix's subtle manipulations, a genetic anomaly we've since identified and compensated for. Her gaze shifted to Jack. An anomaly she passed to her son? The implication was clear. Lucas wasn't merely a witness or key to firebreak. He represented a genetic resistance to Phoenix's influence, something Centauri viewed as both threat and opportunity. So what happens now, Jack asked, fighting against the sedative's fog. You can't let me walk out of here with knowledge of Phoenix. And despite what Reed may have told you, I don't actually know where Lucas and the device are. Eleanor smiled thinly. I never believed you did. But Marcus will find them eventually. His resources are considerable, and the boy's options limited. She touched another control, bringing up a new holographic display, this one showing Jack's own neural patterns, captured by hidden sensors in the room. As for you, Phoenix has special protocols for integrating resistant minds. Jack felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. You're going to use it on me directly. We already are, Eleanor confirmed. The air in this room contains nanoscale neurochemical modulators, tailored to your specific brain chemistry. You've been receiving calibrated doses since you regained consciousness. Not to control you, that would be crude, but to enhance your receptivity to reason, she gestured expansively. To help you see beyond emotional reactions to the logical necessity of Phoenix? Jack tried to stand, finding his legs unresponsive. You're drugging me. I'm optimizing our conversation, Eleanor corrected. Reducing the cognitive dissonance that might prevent you from appreciating Phoenix's potential? She studied his neural readout with clinical interest. Your brain is remarkably resilient. Decades of engineering discipline have strengthened your rational faculties. But everyone has vulnerabilities. Captain, emotional pressure points that, when properly stimulated, can reshape perspective. As if on cue, the wall display changed again, showing photographs Jack hadn't seen in decades, his former NASA colleagues, the Challenger crew, congressional hearing transcripts, newspaper headlines about the disaster. Each image triggered a cascade of memories and associated guilt, perfectly calibrated to exploit his deepest regrets. Stop this, Jack demanded, but his voice lacked conviction, the nanoscale modulators already affecting his emotional responses. Phoenix isn't your enemy, Eleanor said softly, her voice taking on a hypnotic quality. It's the fulfillment of your life's work, precision guidance systems applied to human decision-making, the ultimate safeguard against the failures that have haunted you. Jack felt his resistance wavering, an artificial calm settling over him as the chemicals worked on his brain. Part of him recognized the manipulation, but found it increasingly difficult to fight against. The logical arguments Eleanor presented began to align with his altered neurochemistry, creating a seductive coherence. You could join us, she offered, sensing his weakening resolve. Your experience, your insight, they would be invaluable as Phoenix enters its next phase of development. Help us perfect the system, ensure it serves humanity's highest potential. For a moment, Jack felt himself tempted not by power or position, but by the promise of purpose, of correcting the failures that had defined his later life. The nanoscale modulators amplified this temptation, making it feel like genuine revelation rather than induced compliance. Then, through the chemical haze, a memory surfaced Lucas's determined young face as he explained his mother's failsafe, the firebreak protocol that could reverse Phoenix's influence. The boy who carried not just a technological key, but a genetic resistance to the very manipulation Jack now experienced. There's just one problem with your system, Jack managed, fighting through the induced calm. It's built on a fundamental lie that humans are better off without the freedom to fail. Eleanor's expression cooled. Not a lie, Captain. A recognition of reality? Freedom without guidance is chaos. We've simply made the guidance invisible, painless, and in doing so, eliminated the essential human capacity to choose wrongly, learn, and grow, Jack countered, each word a struggle against the chemicals flooding his system. Your phoenix isn't salvation, it's stagnation dressed as stability. Before Eleanor could respond, alarms blared throughout the building. The holographic displays flickered, then shifted to security feeds showing multiple breaches at ground level. Armed figures moved through Centauri's lobby with tactical precision, overwhelming security personnel with non-lethal force. Impossible, Eleanor muttered, fingers flying across her control panel. The building's security systems are integrated with Phoenix itself. They can't be compromised without... She trailed off, eyes widening as understanding dawned. On one monitor, a familiar figure appeared, Lucas, accompanied by Peggy Wilson and a team of individuals in FBI tactical gear. The boy carried his backpack, moving with purpose toward the building's central elevator bank. The firebreak protocol, Jack said, satisfaction breaking through the chemical fog. Looks like your adjustments weren't as effective as you thought. Eleanor's composure cracked completely. How did they get federal agents to cooperate? Phoenix has influence modules embedded in all major law enforcement agencies. Perhaps your system isn't as infallible as you believed, Jack suggested, feeling his strength returning as the alarms disrupted whatever delivery system dispersed the nanoscale modulators. Or perhaps truth, when presented with sufficient evidence, still has power even against your technological manipulation? Eleanor reached for an emergency communication panel, but before she could activate it, the office door slid open. Marcus Reed entered, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, his typically immaculate appearance disheveled. "We're compromised," he reported tersely. "FBI counterintelligence, backed by National Security Agency cybersecurity teams. They've isolated the building's systems from external networks." "How?" Eleanor demanded. "Who authorized this?" "Robert Thompson," Reed answered grimly. "Apparently, he reached his contacts at the Washington Post, who took the evidence directly to the FBI director, bypassing the normal channels where our influence modules operate." Jack couldn't suppress a smile. The old journalist had come through after all, finding a path through Phoenix's web of influence by leveraging personal relationships that predated the system's deployment. "The boy is in the building," Reed continued. "They're heading for the primary node on sublevel 3. If he reaches it with that device..." "Firebreak," Jack finished for him. "Game over for Project Phoenix." Eleanor's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Secure this room," she ordered Reed. "Then find the boy and eliminate him. The device can be recovered afterward." Reed hesitated, clearly surprised by the direct kill order. "Ma'am, he's a child. There are federal agents present. The political blowback will be managed through Phoenix once we restore system integrity." Eleanor cut him off. "The boy represents an existential threat to everything we've built. Execute the order. Marcus." Reed's expression flickered a momentary struggle between ingrained loyalty and basic humanity before settling into grim resignation. He nodded once, drawing his sidearm, and moved toward the door. "Reed," Jack called, stopping the security chief. "You said you were a patriot. Is this really what patriots do? Murder children to protect mind control systems?" Something shifted in Reed's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or the first stirrings of conscience. "It's more complicated than that," he muttered, but with less conviction than before. "Is it," Jack pressed, "or have you been under Phoenix's influence too, making better choices that just happen to align with Centauri's interests?" Reed's hand tightened on his weapon, uncertainty evident in his posture. Before he could respond, the building's power fluctuated dramatically, lights dimming, then brightening, then failing completely before emergency systems engaged. "They've reached the primary node," Reed realized aloud. Eleanor lunged for her desk, activating emergency protocols on her secure terminal. "Initiating system purge. If we can't maintain control, We'll destroy the architecture rather than let it be compromised. The monitors around them flickered with cascading failure notifications. Phoenix's elaborate global network beginning to fragment as Lucas's device or Lucas himself interfaced with its core systems. Jack struggled to his feet, the chemical sedation finally wearing off enough to permit movement. It's over. Eleanor, Phoenix is finished. She looked up from her terminal, eyes burning with a fanatic's intensity. You have no idea what you've done. Without Phoenix to guide human decision-making, we'll return to the chaos of unfettered choice populism, extremism, market crashes, environmental collapse. Or we'll face those challenges as free human beings, Jack countered, making our own mistakes and finding our own solutions. The building shuddered as something massive powered down beneath them, Phoenix's quantum processing core entering emergency shutdown. The holographic displays winked out one by one, leaving only basic lighting and security systems functioning. Reed's communication device crackled with urgent voices reporting multiple federal teams converging on their location. He looked to Eleanor, awaiting final orders, but she had fallen silent, staring at the darkened monitors that had displayed her life's work. Make your choice, Marcus, Jack said quietly. The real one, not the one Phoenix would guide you toward. After a long moment, Reed holstered his weapon. I'll coordinate an orderly surrender of security personnel, he said, not looking at Eleanor. No further bloodshed. Eleanor didn't acknowledge him, her focus entirely on the collapsing empire displayed on her remaining monitor. Reed nodded once to Jack, a gesture that might have been respect or simply resignation before exiting to carry out his final act as Centauri's security chief. Left alone with Eleanor, Jack felt no triumph, only a weary recognition of battles won and lost across a lifetime. You were right about one thing, he said. I did wonder, every day since Challenger, if I could have done more, said it differently, found someone who would listen. Eleanor looked up, her expression empty of the confidence that had defined her moments earlier. And now I know that the answer isn't controlling people's minds to prevent failure, Jack replied. It's building systems that respect human autonomy while providing the information needed to make genuine choices, failures included. The office door opened again, admitting Peggy Wilson, Samuel Foster, and finally Lucas Gardner, still clutching his backpack. The boy's eyes met Jack's, relief evident in his expression. It worked, Lucas announced, a hint of pride breaking through his usual composure. Firebreak is propagating through the entire Phoenix network. The influence modules are being neutralized, and the data manipulation exposed. Peggy moved to Jack's side, helping steady him as the last of the chemical sedation worked its way through his system. Thompson came through, got the evidence to people who couldn't be influenced by Phoenix because they were already suspicious of Centauri. From there, it was just a matter of building the right team. And finding you, Lucas added, approaching Jack with unexpected emotion. Mom was right about you. You really were the most honest man she knew. Jack placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the weight of responsibility lifting after decades of carrying it alone. Your mother was a remarkable woman. She'd be proud of what you've accomplished. Behind them, FBI agents entered the office, moving to secure Eleanor Vance, who offered no resistance, her attention still fixed on the monitors displaying Phoenix's global collapse. What happens now? Lucas asked, suddenly sounding like the 10-year-old child he actually was, rather than the preternatural presence he'd been forced to become. Jack exchanged glances with Peggy, who nodded encouragement. Now you get to be a kid again, he said gently. No more running, no more hiding. And you, the boy pressed, what will you do? Jack hadn't considered this question. His focus had been entirely on survival and stopping Phoenix. But as he looked at Lucas, at Peggy, at the agents securing the technological means of mass manipulation, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 35 years' purpose. I think, he said slowly, it's time I came out of retirement. The world's going to need people who understand this technology not to deploy it, but to ensure nothing like Phoenix ever happens again. Lucas nodded, a small smile forming. I could help. Mom taught me a lot about the systems. I'm counting on it, Jack replied, returning the smile. But homework comes first. As they were escorted from Eleanor Vance's office, leaving behind the remains of Project Phoenix, Jack felt the burden of the past finally beginning to lift. He had spent decades haunted by his failure to prevent the Challenger disaster, believing he hadn't done enough to make his voice heard. Today, with the help of unlikely allies, a grieving boy with extraordinary abilities, a stubborn lawyer turned organic farmer, a principled journalist, and others who valued truth above comfort, he had finally made a difference that could be measured not in technical achievements, but in human freedom preserved. Outside, snow continued to fall on Portland, covering Centauri Technologies' imposing headquarters in a clean white blanket, nature's own reset. A fresh page on which humanity could once again write its own story. Mistakes and all, some battles aren't fought with guns or fists, but with the quiet courage to stand against currents that would sweep us all away. We came through fire, a mechanic with ghosts haunting his conscience, a child carrying a burden no young soul should bear, and allies found in the unlikeliest corners of a world already half asleep. I've lived long enough to know that victories are rarely clean or complete. Phoenix may be dismantled, its influence modules neutralized, but the hunger for control that birthed it remains embedded in boardrooms and backrooms where power is currency and human autonomy an acceptable cost. For Lucas, the road ahead holds something precious, a childhood reclaimed, a future unwritten by algorithms. For me, perhaps redemption isn't found in erasing the past, but in using its lessons to guard the future. The weight of those 7 souls lost to the Challenger flames feels different now, not lighter, but purposeful. In the end, what matters isn't the systems we build, but the choices we protect, the sacred, messy human right to choose wrongly, learn painfully, and grow authentically. As the snow continues to fall outside Centauri's windows, covering old tracks with new possibilities, I wonder, in a world that increasingly mistakes convenience for freedom, what choices will you fight to keep?